What is a bannable offense in Overwatch? Naturally, there are things that have been specified by the development team as clear offenses which can get you banned from competitive play. The discussion, however, has been shifting back and forth for a while now. Point of contention being the lack of a clearly defined rule set that would help guide players through their competitive experience. Now, I am personally under the impression that, for many, this is merely a cop-out. Most players are not looking for a strictly defined rule set so they can follow it. Instead, they want to know what kind of BS they can get away with. A term I've seen tossed around more than usual in recent memory will be soft throwing in competitive play. Now, I don't know whether or not there's a definition attached to it, but the general consensus seems to be that soft throwing is the practice of doing something to intentionally lose, which cannot clearly be defined as a bannable offense by the system. For example, swap into a character that is very obviously a suboptimal pick given what the opposition is running, intentionally missing shots, or playing poorly altogether. Now, while the term itself is not something I have necessarily seen brought up a lot until recently, the practice itself is not new by any means, and it is indeed something that has plagued the game for a while now. What's interesting about this whole discussion is that you always have the camp of I can do whatever I want, which needless to say is a terrible attitude in a team-based game. However, it seems like Blizzard might be about to disagree with these players in the near future. A recent Reddit post shows several data mined messages that were hidden in the most recent PTR update, and these messages are fairly interesting. Your recent behavior is not in line with how most Overwatch players act. You have been reported multiple times for inactivity and/or griefing, and further reports may result in a gameplay suspension. Please help us create the best possible Overwatch community by staying positive and avoiding actions intended to disrupt Overwatch games. And another one cites, your recent communication is not in line with how most Overwatch players communicate. You have been reported multiple times for abusive chat, and further reports may result in you losing communication privileges or being suspended. Now, there's one big emphasis in this whole shift in the way they seem to want to handle punishments, and that is the obvious connection they make to the player base itself. People keep asking things like, who decides whether or not me playing this hero is considered throwing? Who decides whether or not me doing this and that is considered throwing? And Blizzard now seemingly has the answer. The community does. And before you all flip your tables because you are afraid of a wave of false reports coming in resulting in unwarranted suspensions, take a chill pill. Bottom line for any of us is that if we do nothing wrong, we have nothing to be scared of. It is the kind of player that always looks to read between the lines and find gray zones they can abuse that has to be scared of this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your average competitive player will have no trouble at all knowing what constitutes as proper gameplay. Play for the team and not for yourself. That's it. Now, I know that what worries people is mainly the vocal part of the community that speaks openly about their dislikes on an open platform like Reddit, the people who angrily shout at each other non-stop. But there's one word in this whole discussion that is really important, and that is machine learning. A recent post that was featured on a Battle.net client gives us an insight to how MMR calculations are being handled, and once I read this out, I think you will start to understand why this matters to our discussion. Who determines which stats are important for any particular situation? The community does by playing the game. The system does not have any preconceptions about which stats are important. Instead, it is measuring how players are playing in particular situations in order to determine which stats are most important to highly skilled play. Furthermore, the system is fully dynamic and continually updating itself, so it automatically adjusts as balance changes, the meta shifts, and players find creative new ways to use a hero. And lastly for our discussion, our goal with this system is not to define a specific playstyle for each hero, since we are never manually setting which stats are considered important, but rather let our machine learning driven system define importance and weighting for stats based on millions of games of data. Now, what if I told you that this post was not made in relation to Overwatch, but rather Heroes of the Storm? It might surprise you that this level of transparency is being offered by the Heroes team for a system that is not even going live until December, while we have been asking questions for over a year that never seem to get answered properly. This is relevant to us anyway because we have reason to assume that the system works similarly, if not exactly the same, in Overwatch. At BlizzCon, it has been announced that Heroes of the Storm would adapt the voice over IP system from Overwatch, and I think it's no coincidence that they mentioned the implementation of a performance-based matchmaking system in the exact same breath. It would be fair to assume that both of these things are borrowed from Overwatch. Assuming that the system works that same way, and assuming that it has for as long as we have been playing the game, it shows a very clear direction the dev team is taking. It is a community-driven one. That means we don't vote by crying on the forums or on Reddit, we vote with our gameplay. By just playing the way we do, winning and losing matches, we are teaching the system what traditionally does and doesn't work. And simultaneously, the community is building up a portfolio of commonly adapted strategies that have proven useful throughout the course of their matches. And that is no arbitrary decision of a single player, nor is it necessarily driven by the pro scene. These things are considered meta because they have proven themselves useful. Neither the development team nor any of the systems in the game itself are trying to tell us what we can and cannot play. We are in an environment that is almost entirely driven by the community itself. And it seems like this is going to extend to soft throwing as well. When the community grows tired of players participating on ladder who refuse to play for and with the team, then these players will eventually be weeded out by those who are truly invested in the core competitive experience. Fact of the matter is that one does not simply collect 100 reports without actually doing something wrong. Sure, in the case of content creators, it could be argued that they have eaten reports solely from people who dislike their content. But when we're talking about the average player, you might feel in the right to play Torbjorn in every competitive match you play, but if you playing Torbjorn and nothing but Torbjorn is perceived as disruptive, and you not swapping off a Torbjorn causes your team to lose, then you're going to get reported, and that rightfully so. Which means that you should not at all be surprised when seeing one of those messages pop up in the near future. What you guys have to understand, however, is that this is not an argument of meta-slaving. It never has been. It's about the practice of treating this game as you should, as a team-based experience. Play for the greater good of your team and not for your own statistics. You paying $40 does not give you the right to ruin the experience for 5 other players who, guess what, also paid $40 for the game. You are the odd one out that refuses to stick to the rules of competitive play. Don't go around blaming others for being a spoiled princess yourself. Off-meta strategies have a place in this game as much as traditional meta comps do. A well-executed off-meta comp can throw the enemies off guard and easily snowball into a victory. The question is not what you play, it's how you play it. And no matter what you decide to do, you should make sure that the team is in agreement of that. Stop acting like the fight against one-tricking is the same as trying to enforce meta-slavery, because it isn't. Stop trying to enforce your selfish gameplay onto others who want nothing to do with that. The community decides what is and what isn't wrong, and people don't just get reported 100 times for no reason. And you know what? This is not just me as some random guy on the internet telling you that. This is the voice of the core competitive community as a whole. And if you don't like that, maybe it's time for you to play something else. But this is me done for the day as I talk about the act of soft throwing in Overwatch and some greater implications that recently data mined messages could have on the way disciplinary actions are going to be handled in the future. Feel free to discuss anything mentioned in today's video down in the comment section below, and you can also rest assured that I'm going to make a follow-up video that dives deeper into the previously referenced post that talks about how the performance-based matchmaking system actually works. But until then, thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to see you all next time.